Hello, everyone who's tuning in. If you're with us, we're just going to wait another moment before we get started here with Dr. Rick Hanson. So feel free to scroll to the bottom of the page and introduce yourself in the comment section below. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from, and what you'd like to learn tonight. So thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network, and it's my honor to introduce Dr. Rick Hanson tonight for this live video call with all of you. And hello to all of you that are watching the recording later on as well. Dr. Rick Hanson is an incredibly skilled and generous teacher. He's a renowned psychologist, New York Times bestselling author, founder of Wellspring Institute for Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, and a senior fellow of Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And using his extensive background in psychology and practical neuroscience, he spent over the last 35 years developing the 12 pillars of well-being. Each pillar represents a specific pivotal skill for cultivating overall well-being and resilience. And tonight we're going to go over this model with Dr. Rick Hanson. And in particular, we're going to explore the two pillars of aspiration and self-caring. And after we go into some of this in the beginning of the call, we'll also open it up for questions from the community for those of you who are watching live. And we'll be using the comment section down below to take your questions. So as I invited others earlier, go ahead and scroll down, test it out, introduce yourself, let us know where you're tuning in from and what you'd like to learn. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them as they come up. There's going to be a little bit of a lag between us collecting the questions and answering them. So ask your questions as we're going. There's going to be a lot of questions coming in. So if you can keep them brief and to the point, that'll help us get to more questions. And then after the Q&A, we'll also have an opportunity to hear a little bit about Rick Hanson's upcoming course, focused on the 12 pillars of well-being and how you can cultivate those in your everyday life. So now it's my honor to introduce Dr. Rick Hanson.
Well, Kaylee, it's always great to be with you. We're friends, and I'm honored actually to be here and have the chance to communicate with and hear from even so many people involved in your program. So let's do this. I'm excited.
Thank you. So I think just to give, especially folks who are less familiar with the model, a little bit of an idea, could you tell us about the basic structure of the 12 pillars, what this framework is, and why you were inspired to create it?
Yeah, well, the basic idea is very simple and very immediate. As each of us goes through a day, we have things to deal with. We have issues with other people. We have to get work done. Maybe we're grappling with a health issue inside our own body. We're trying to be successful, we're trying to stay out of trouble, we're trying to get stuff done. What enables us to do that? Well, the main thing that enables us to succeed and be happy and to have a lot to offer to other people over the course of the day has to do with the resources we have inside ourselves. That's a fancy term, the psychological resources. I think of them as inner strengths, mindfulness, self-compassion, resilience, happiness, positive mood, optimism, gratitude, emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, motivation. These are the strengths we draw upon. These are the supplies inside that we draw upon to make our way down the road of life. The fancy model for this in psychology has a term, the stress diathesis model. It really means essentially that our course over a day, a year, or a lifespan is the result of three kinds of factors. The challenges that wear on us, the vulnerabilities they land on and penetrate through, and the resources we draw upon to deal with challenges and to shore up our vulnerabilities. Those are three fundamental factors. They're all important to address, but I find the most interesting one is to grow resources, because that's typically where we have the most power and opportunity. And in terms of where we grow the resources in our mind. I should have pointed at the whole body. We can grow resources in the world, in the physical body, or in our own psychology. But I think that the resources we grow in our own psychology, like I said, happiness, confidence, interpersonal skills, love, those we take with us wherever we go, and no one can stop us from growing them day by day. So how do we get these strengths, right? Strengths matter. About 2/3 of the variation in the strengths people have are acquired. They're not baked into DNA. About 1/3 of the variation has to do with genetic or heritable factors, but that means that 2/3 is in principle growable. Fantastic. So how do we actually grow it? And this brings us into how the brain changes for the better over time. Because if we become more mindful over time or more grateful over time, we're less burdened by the legacy of our childhood trauma. If there's any kind of change of mind over time that's lasting, there must also be a lasting change in the brain, a lasting change of neural structure and function. So then the question becomes, how do we promote that positive change? And how can people themselves influence the brain change process from the inside out? We're very vulnerable to being changed by negative experiences. We're vulnerable to being changed by people who are bossy or pushy or let us down, or to use a technical term, assholes. We're very vulnerable to be affected in that way. All right, but how can we influence the change process from the inside out? And that's what I've developed pulled together a lot of research on that. What can people do to grab hold of this power to help themselves grow every day, and then use that power of growing every day to particular things to grow, like being able to be compassionate for others and yourself. That's the first pillar of well-being, or we could think of it as an inner strength. Another second pillar of well-being or inner strength is mindfulness, being able to be aware of the outer world and the inner world with some kind of steadiness and clarity. A third key strength is the strength of strengths. That's the strength of learning. Or in a brain-based model, I think of it as positive neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the capacity of the nervous system to be changed by experiences. Positive neuroplasticity is changing it for the better. So that's the third strength in my 12 strengths model. The fourth strength is grit, resilience, stability, being able to be steadfast no matter what's happening to you. The fifth strength, or where am I? Yeah, the fifth strength, I think of as gratitude, being able to be really, really grateful and contented and happy. And then there are other strengths as well, and I'm sure we'll talk about them too. But the larger point to finish up here is that what happens to us in life is really shaped by the strengths we've developed over time. Second, we have the capacity to grow these strengths ourselves and in a structured way, develop ourselves, like through my online program, and use those methods every day of our life. And I think that's fantastic, especially at a time when so many people feel so pushed around by so many things.
Thank you. And so from what I understand, you're saying that each of these strengths can be cultivated. And so what is the basic process for doing that?
All right, great. How does the brain change for the better, and how can you turbocharge that process yourself, right? So it's a really, really simple two-step process, but both steps are necessary, and people routinely leave out the second step. The first step is we must experience what we want to grow, which means having some kind of activated pattern of neural activity in the nervous system, embedded in the body, embedded in the world, but still mainly the most immediate source of the growth that we can have, the healing that we can have, is inside the human brain. All right, so we need to have an experience. We need to have a pattern of neural activation. The second necessary step for growing lasting strengths, trait-based compassion or happiness or love or calm or spiritual awakening, that too is a kind of thing we can grow over time. To have that, there must be a change in the brain, and that process can be accomplished through all kinds of mechanisms. But the three that I think we keep coming back to again and again and again. Once you're having that experience of feeling cared about by another person, or the experience of calm strength, that you can cope, you can deal, or the understanding that your needs matter as much as anyone else's in your family. When you're having that useful experience, stay with it for a breath or longer. There's a famous saying that neurons that fire together, wire together. The longer they keep firing, the more they're going to tend to be wiring. Second, as much as you can, feel it in your body. The more embodied an experience is, the more active you are, the more that you're in touch with yourself, the more emotional it is, the larger the trace it's going to tend to leave behind in physical changes in your nervous system. And third, focus on what feels good about it. While you're staying with it for that breath or two or three, feeling it in your body, what's enjoyable for you about gratitude? What's enjoyable for you about feeling connected with your friend Kaylee? What looks beautiful? Like, oh, wow, what a nice red blouse. That's an amazing red. I could just fall into that red. That's great, right? That is a chance to recognize what's enjoyable about it, or what's meaningful, what's relevant to you about realizing, for example, today, given your childhood, that actually other people do care about you and do see special good qualities in you. Why might that be a very relevant and meaningful experience for you to have today? So these are just different ways over the course of literally a breath or two or three. You can take more time if you want, but these are key ways to turn passing states. That's the easy part. To turn passing states into lasting beneficial traits, inner strengths that are increasingly hardwired into your own nervous system.
Thank you. So tonight we're going to be diving into two specific pillars, two specific strengths that can be cultivated. And the first one is aspiration, of working with facing fears and pursuing your goals. And the second is self-caring. And so maybe we could dive into the pillar of aspiration. Why is this a strength that's important to cultivate? And what are some ways that we can actually cultivate it in our own lives?
Yeah. So, and just to double check here, and so people can know, I think you and I will talk about these two strengths, these two pillars, and then we'll open it up. Is that right? So we'll get through both of them, and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, definitely. And if folks have questions as we're going, do write them down. We have someone capturing all of the questions. And so that takes a moment for them to write them down and pass them over to me. And I have some that have already been coming in, so we might sprinkle some in as we're going as well. So definitely write your questions in the comment section down below as they come up for you.
Yeah, well, so aspiration. To me, aspiration is just a word for our work or the way we engage life, including potentially being ambitious and also potentially really wanting to contribute, to serve and to help other people. How do we do that without getting caught up in feelings of inadequacy or drivenness or craving in the broadest sense? How do we actually do that? And this real world interest, I want to build on and make a couple of key points here. The first key point is that the process I'm describing of identifying beneficial experiences a handful of times as you go through your day, maybe a few of them that are really key, like during a meditation or during an appointment with your therapist or having an important conversation maybe with a friend. You can focus more. But in general, I'm describing a process that's pretty informal over the course of your day. A major purpose in doing this is to build the strengths inside to deal with hard things. And a lot of the experiences that you're internalizing and growing are not la-di-da, California cupcake type experiences. They have to do with feelings of fierce compassion for other people, a fiery commitment to social justice, a feeling of no, stop, I'm done with this. If that's what you're trying to grow, as well as things like healthy remorse, realizing, ooch, that hurt my friend, that hurt my kid. I don't want to ever do that again. So I want to be really, really clear. I'm not talking about positive thinking. And I'm also informed here by a sense of the challenges of life for all of us, for many of us extremely intensively, and a recognition of the ways in which the brain is designed to overlearn from negative experiences, because that's what worked back in Jurassic Park. And that's what works today in the modern equivalent of Jurassic Park, some real battle zone, let's say you're growing up in or working in. But for most people, the brain's negativity bias, making it like Velcro for bad experiences, but Teflon for good ones, is a design flaw today. It's problematic today. It creates a lot of unnecessary suffering. So it's in the context of an awareness of these things that I focus on positive neuroplasticity, not out of some kind of la-di-da positive thinking. Second, people understandably might ask, well, are you just going to reinforce craving? So I come at this in a way that's very informed by the Buddha's deep analysis of suffering and its sources, including the ways in which our desires get in the mix, where we get attached to certain results, including pushing away pain, let's say. And so I want to be crystal clear. What's interesting is that people repeatedly internalize the feeling of needs met enough. Their craving diminishes. And as people increasingly internalize experiences of strengths of various kinds to meet their needs, then increasingly they're able to meet their needs in a calm, strong, peaceful, and loving way without getting sucked into craving about it. Cultivation undoes craving, which is really wonderful over time. So it's in that frame then that I want to talk about aspiration, if I could. How about I just name two quick stories that are, for me, really illustrative, and then see if you have a comment about that, Kayla. You always ask great questions or have great comments. So, two stories. One story related to aspiration. I was rock climbing in Colorado, in Boulder Canyon, with a friend of mine, El Dorado Canyon, rather, 30 years ago. And my friend and I hired a guide who was an extremely good climber. And the guide asked us on the very first day, what goals do we have for climbing? Over the course of the week, we were going to climb for a week and have a lot of fun. And I said, I want to climb 511 before I leave here. Now, 511, if you know rock climbing grades, 5.11 is a really difficult grade, especially for somebody like me who was totally out of shape and was just kind of rolling in off the couch. Our guide said at one point, you guys are the best I've seen off the couch, which was a real backhanded but high compliment, actually. So, and my friend burst out. My friend Bob said, Hanson, you're crazy. You know, I could barely climb 5.8. I couldn't even climb 5.8. What are you trying to do? Climb this really, really difficult stuff. You're going to be so mad at yourself. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to hate yourself by the time you leave. Because that's how he would feel, because he's a very driven guy. I said, no, it's a stretch goal. I'm going to go for it. And if I don't make it because it's so ambitious, it's going to be okay. I was aspiring without attachment to the result. And as the week unfolded, I started really focusing. I started training. After the third or fourth day, the guide's eyes started to light up like, whoa, this middle-aged, out-of-shape guy might actually do this. Whoa. And we started zeroing in on what we were doing. My friend Bob started cheering me on and revving me on. And actually on the very last day, I climbed genuine 511 without a fall. And I felt phenomenal at the top, and it was fantastic. And you know, if I had failed, I would have been disappointed, but it wouldn't have been hurtful. I wouldn't have been burdened by it. And because I was framing this as aspiration without attachment to the result, I was more willing to go for it because the risks of self-loathing and self-criticism were not so great. So for me, the essence of aspiration, healthy aspiration, is to grow inner resources of various kinds that enable you to pursue wholesome aims, that's important, with skillful means, that's important, while being at peace fundamentally with whatever happens. You might be upset about it, you might be disappointed about it, you might be understandably sad or angry about defeat or failure, but fundamentally in the core of your being, you're not going to be invaded and hijacked by it. So that's one aspect of aspiration without attachment. And there are a number of ways that we can talk about growing the resources inside that support that attitude and how to deal with blocks to developing that attitude and the strengths inside that help you do that. Maybe we'll talk more about that. The other little story I want to tell is I call it making your offering, and it relates to aspiration without attachment. So again, 35 years ago, at least, before our kids were born, I was talking with a friend who was about to give a talk at San Francisco Zen Center. And this was his first talk. He was really wanting to do a good job. And I teased him a little bit because I happened to know that a number of homeless people would come in, or unhoused people come in to the San Francisco Zen Center for the free coffee and the warmth and the nice people, but they weren't necessarily interested in this talk. So I was provocative, partly because I was jealous of him, that he got to do a really neat thing. So I was going to take him down a notch. Actually, I revealed what an idiot I was. So I said, you know, why are you doing this? A lot of those people aren't really going to care. And he just stared at me like I didn't get it, because I didn't get it. And he said, he made this gesture like this. And he directed his hands toward my feet. He said, Rick, my job is to make the offering, to make it skillfully, to bring my heart into it, tell a few jokes, keep it interesting. But after that, that's their job. What they do with what I've offered, that's on them. Wow, is that a revelation? And it really lightens it up, because our job is not to necessarily make something happen in the mind of the other person, or to get them to have a certain reaction to what we do, to get them to buy our book or buy our course or go out on a second date with us or whatever it might be. Like, we can't make them do that. What we can do, what's under our influence, is to make the best possible offering we can. But after that, it's out of our hands. Thousands of causes determine the outcome in anything that have nothing to do with us individually. And still, we have the responsibility, which is cannot be delegated, to make the best possible offering that we can each day. So that combination of taking responsibility for making the offering you can while being at peace with whatever happens is also central to this strength of aspiration.
Thank you. Yeah, so with aspiration, we're talking about trying to achieve our goals. And I think that the way that a lot of us learn how to do that, or that's more dominant in our culture, is to push yourself. And there's a sense of, really working hard, and that there's a lot on the line, and you kind of have to make it a big deal. Otherwise, you might not follow through on it. And there's a lot of fear in that approach. And what I hear you describing is a really beautiful balance between relaxation and pursuit of goals. So a lot of the questions I'm seeing come up relate with fear. How do you move past and overcome fears to fail? The name's a little hard to read here, but I think it's Sigrid. How do I move out of doing things out of fear to being a more balanced approach, from Karen? How do you follow your goals and make your offering without being affected by others' feelings or reactions, from Jessica? So maybe we could speak a little bit about these resources you were mentioning that can be cultivated to work with the fear that can come up around pursuing.
Yeah, that's great. So fear is fundamental. It relates to what I think of as our most primary need for safety, broadly defined. And fear is perfectly normal. It's often informative. There's what's called signal anxiety. It's a signal, potentially. On the other hand, often that signal is like a false alarm. It's like a car bell ringing that's not giving you any information. It's just noise. There's no signal there. So what to do about that? I think of this in terms of general inner resources, strengths you can develop for dealing with anxiety broadly, and then I'll speak briefly to what a person can do about fears that have to do with sticking your neck out or going for it. Right? So I'll just list a number of basic strengths that I know people can develop through some of your programs. We have them really organized in the Foundations of Wellbeing program, and people can do these things on their own as well. So can you relax your body at will? Can you develop more trait, calm in your core? And can you return to that baseline of calm rapidly after you've been stressed, let's say? That's something people can absolutely develop, including relating to getting more regulation of what's called heart rate variability and a greater sense of calm in the visceral core. Very, very wonderful thing to develop. Second wonderful thing is to notice when it's true, and it usually is true, notice that you're all right now. You may not have been all right in the past. You may not be all right in the future. Now, your heart is still beating. You're still breathing. People can do this right now. It's quite remarkable to make yourself feel what you know is true, that in this moment, you're all right. It's not perfect. Maybe your back hurts, your shoes are too tight, you're worried about your kid, where's my kid? But in the core of your being, you're not dying, there's not overwhelming pain, there's not horrible loss. You're basically all right now. And the cultivation of the felt sense of that repetitively hardwires your nervous system learns. It learns from repeated experiences, particularly ones that are turbocharged through the methods that I've described so far. And there are other methods as well for increasing the conversion rate from state to trait, so you grow more and more efficiently from your experiences. But those skills I've described are really fundamental. So when you do feel all right now, take it in. Another resource, when you feel strong, one way or another, including simply that you're enduring, which is a strength for many women. They may not look like a big action hero, but they can hang in there. They're still standing after all the crud that's landed on them. They can endure. When you feel strong, grow that sense of strength. That was really important for me as a super dorky kid to realize that in my own way, I was very tenacious and I had a lot of strength, including the strength of determination. So that's a third major resource, feeling strong. And I'll maybe finish with a couple others really fast. A fourth major resource that directly relates to anxiety, and these are classic resources, being able to appraise threats and opportunities accurately, not overestimating them and not underestimating them, although usually people are on the side of overestimating threats. They overestimate how likely they are, how bad it would be if they occurred, and how little able they would be to cope with them. When in fact, these days, probably, very unlikely, it would feel bad but not devastating, and you could cope with it in a lot of different ways. So that appraisal activity, sometimes somewhat cognitively, is a really important strength to develop. And then the fifth strength, I'll just name kind of for me like the big five. There are others, but these are sort of the big five for safety and anxiety and fear, is to feel cared about by others. This feeling of being cared about by others, and that you have a warm heart. Warm-heartedness is a real resource for safety and for dealing with anxiety. If you feel warm-hearted, flowing out or flowing in, that immediately dials down anxiety. In your brain, there are oxytocin receptors in the prefrontal cortex as well as in the amygdala. And when activity at those receptors increases, related to heartfelt relational experiences, including intense ones, but also mild ones, anxiety diminishes and there's a calming and centering in the whole body. So those five, and the key point about that is that you can have those as passing states, passing experiences. That's better than a sharp stick in the ear, okay? But the money, the opportunity is to turn passing experiences of any one of these five things into developing them increasingly as a trait you have inside that's unconditional. It's not based on your circumstances. It's not based on your partner being nice to you. You got it in your belly and bones, and you take that with you wherever you go. So those are good generally. And then applying specifically and briefly to fears around, let's say, aspiration. People raise questions like, what do I do with fears of, right? Well, first of all, it's great to complete that sentence. Fear of what? It's really good, because what we do is we transfer into the present our background. But in the present, if you said, well, I'm really afraid that if I speak up, someone will hit me. Well, they did hit you. But would they hit you at work today? No, they won't hit you. Or someone might say, well, I'm afraid that I'll just totally make a fool of myself, that I'll just say stupid stuff. Oh, okay. How often do you say stupid stuff? Never. How often in your life have you ever made a fool of yourself? Well, there was this one time in college and it was terrible. Like, okay, has it happened since? Did you learn anything from what happened then? Are you going to let yourself make a fool of yourself these days? No, it's not very likely at all. So it's really useful to burrow into the fear of what, and to become increasingly mindful of the deeper layers of the what. It's what I call the dreaded experience. What's the dreaded experience? It's dreaded. People don't even want to risk it. Well, what is it really? And then once you actually name it, so maybe the dreaded experience is not rational, but it's still there. It still constrains people and reactivates them. Maybe the dreaded experience is feeling catastrophically worthless. terribly shamed, damaged goods, defective, broken. That's the dreaded experience that anchors everything else. People don't want to risk that at all. That's very understandable. Okay, great. But then the question becomes, how do you resource yourself so you're willing to tolerate risking the dreaded experience? And here's where a path is incredibly useful. Of all the techniques I've ever learned in my whole history, a long time, psychologist, mental health person, teacher, so forth. This is one of the top 5. Know what the dreaded experience is, and then take very small risks. And when it goes well, as it usually does, usually goes well, really, really, really internalize it. So maybe a person is afraid that if I am a little stronger at work, or I speak up, or I relax a little bit, I let myself be a little looser in the meeting and not so uptight. I'm afraid I'll feel terribly ashamed of myself, worthless and horrible, like I just want to die. Because I did when I was young. Okay, well, take a little risk. Sit up a little straighter in the meeting. Don't say a word. Or say one word while you sit up a little straighter and see what happens. Or raise your finger when someone interrupts you and say, I'm not done yet. I'm going to keep going now. And keep on going. Oh my God, right? And then when it goes well, bring a big spoon. That's yum, yum, yum. That's major psychological nutrient. What a wonderful nutrient to internalize. And how tender and how sweet and how kind to give that to yourself today. Wow, great. And then bit by bit by bit, small step at a time, small risk at a time, you gradually push back the bars of your invisible cage, right? So that increasingly, you don't want to have the dreaded experience. Who would want to feel terribly worthless and ashamed and like they want to die? On the other hand, you're no longer living in fear. You're no longer playing small. You're no longer staying inside your little cage to avert any possibility whatsoever of that experience ever happening again.
And can you say a little bit about the other side of I think that when you put yourself out there, you're bound to have mistakes or failures of how to deal with that when that does happen, when it doesn't go the way that you thought it would, when you don't get the response you were looking for?
Yeah, that's really great. So here's where different things help. I'll just name some resources, and each one of them is something you can grow. You can grow a feeling in your body. You can grow an attitude. You can grow a belief. You can develop these things over time. Self-compassion is a fantastic resource. A lot of research shows that as people grow self-compassion, which we're going to get to in the self-caring pillar in a moment, they're more willing to dream big dreams, to dare greatly, as Brene Brown puts it, because they're not so at risk of devastating self-criticism. Self-compassion, and then in the moment, if it doesn't go well, you just go, oh, this is embarrassing. Ruh-roh, this doesn't feel good. Okay, what am I going to do next? Another resource to have inside is an awareness of your basic goodness, of your naturally kind, good, well-intended nature. That, okay, I blew it, I messed up, and I'm not horrible. I'm not a mean person. I want to construct rather than destroy. I want to build up rather than tear down. I look for the good in other people. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you, the listener. You're that way. It's a recognition of that in yourself. That's another thing to draw upon in that moment. It's also helpful to put it in perspective. Is this a career-ending mistake? Or is this something that people are going to kind of joke about for the next few days and then forget about it a week from now, certainly a month or year from now? What's the actual scale of it? Another is, what can you learn? What can you learn and what can you repair? And in a funny kind of way, mistakes can be reframed as very, very useful opportunities to learn. And in my experience of being in business and in the world a lot, the key question for me is whether someone has a learning curve. And it's also true in an intimate relationship. Does your partner have a learning curve? That's absolutely fundamental. And do you have a learning curve? Do you grow? Do you learn? Do you correct? Can you be trusted? to implement correction when you understand it and to be sincere and motivated behind that. So if other people can see that, yeah, you made a mistake, but you're very quickly learning from it, you don't repeat it, and you're drawing even broader lessons, that too is something that can help you, and they'll feel better when they see that in you.
Thank you. I think that's the perfect segue into the pillar of self-caring. And so I think you were giving us a little bit of a sense there why it's such an important strength to cultivate, but could you tell us more on that?
I put it first in the order of the 12 strengths, which is in the program. It takes about an hour a week max to go through this over the course of a year. People can accelerate it, they can jump around, it's really up to them. But I put self-caring first. And it could also be called maybe compassion, especially self-compassion, because that's fundamental. If a person does not care about their own well-being, if they don't have compassion for themselves, that sort of tender sweetness, and also they don't have a kind of muscular sense of putting their shoulder to the wheel, getting on their own side, this will not pass. And also, if they don't have a kind of a principled, more conceptual belief that their needs matter too, and they have standing morally, that with responsibilities come rights and rewards. If they lack those things, then they're not going to have any traction to gain or grow any of the other strengths or heal in any kind of way. So this is really foundational. And for me as a therapist, it was surprising for me, Kaylee, to realize that many people don't have this. They're for others. They're a good friend to others. They're a terrible friend to themselves. They care a lot about the suffering of others. They're indifferent to their own pain. They will steadfastly keep coming through for another person, for themselves. They'll make a single half-hearted effort and kind of sputter out, give up. Not good. And I say this not as a criticism, but to name an opportunity, to say, wow, imagine what could shift if you establish this most fundamental stance of all, that your needs matter, your inner experience matters, this life matters. This is your one shot at a life in this body. Who knows what else is out there, but a life in this body, this is your shot. What do you want to make of it? What, given the crummy things that have happened to you, where do you want to go from here? The worst that has happened to you, the more important it is to help the next day be better, to help this day be better. Other people have been crummy to you. The crummier they have been to you, the more important it is for you to be kind and just and encouraging and skillful and helpful with yourself, right? So this is absolutely foundational, and that's what that pillar is about. So we explore in it different elements, which I've named three. I'll just repeat them again. First, can you bring a quality of tender-hearted compassion to your own pain, your own burdens, your own stresses, including fairly mild or subtle ones, but chronic ones, let's say? Can you bring that same warmth, the same empathic benevolence? That's really kind of the essence of compassion. Feeling with, compatio, to suffer with, to feel with not indifference, but rather benevolence, warm wishes, often moving into action, helpfulness if you can. So can you bring that to bear? So people can grow self-compassion. There are a variety of ways to do that. I think Chris Germer's and Kristen Neff's program, Mindful Self-Compassion, is great. There are a number of ways to do it. You can do it in small ways. In the Foundations of Wellbeing program, we have little guided practices. Half of that program is guided meditations. It's really experiential, because the point is, it's not just to have the idea, it's to have the feeling. And then even more, to sink into that feeling as it sinks into you, so you carry it with you more and more wherever you go. Okay, self-compassion. Second, there's a place for this muscular feeling of, I'm for myself. I'm not against them, but I'm for me. And one way into that is to know what it feels like to be an ally for someone else, to be a friend, or even if you're not a friend, you can see the injustice that's been visited upon them, and you are for them. You're morally for them. And there's a muscularity in that. What's that feel like? I'm leaning in, I'm bringing my shoulder to bear. What's that feel like? Can you be that way for yourself? So that too is something that people can, in a structured way, experience and grow over time. And then the last is, frankly, is kind of moral or principled, because often what is a block to people being on their own side and even compassionate toward themselves is beliefs they've internalized that are not even conscious. Like, well, my needs matter after everyone else's. After you're all fed, after you're all happy, after everything's taken care of, after the house is cleaned up, then I can take 10 minutes for me. People have beliefs like that, or they have beliefs that if others see me taking care of myself or treating myself like I matter, they're going to punish me. They're going to shame me. They might bring, a religious fire and brimstone to bear. How dare I think that I matter enough, et cetera, et cetera. And then a person can ask themselves, is that belief actually true? It was true then. Is it true today? Will they actually attack you and shame you if they see you in very reasonable ways, wanting to make sure that you get one of the cookies on the plate too, right? Or that, other people need to help with the housework here, not just me. Are you really going to be attacked? Probably not, right? So that kind of, addressing the beliefs and realizing that even if they're unhappy with you, or even if they are grumble, bottom line is you're entitled. You have rights. They may not like it, and that's on them, but you have the right, right? And so some clarity about that as well is the third major strength that supports the broad strength of being for yourself and self-caring in general.
Thank you. We're about to open it up for questions from the community who's watching. But before we move into that, I wonder, one of the things I most love about your work is these exercises that you guide, where you can really get a taste of the feeling of it as well. And I wonder if there's an exercise that we might be able to do together related to feeling self-care, developing that strength.
Sure, let's try that. And like any guided practice, sometimes it's like trying to light a fire with wet wood. It just doesn't come, and that's okay. Also, there are many different ways to have an experience, which then we want to hardwire into the body. Most of the time, people are having useful experiences already. They're moving through life. Let's say they're on the side of a friend or a child, and then when they know what that feels like, then they can start to have an experience of being that for themselves, right? In this setting, I'm going to guide you through it, but the key takeaway point is that most of the time when you take in a beneficial experience, you're already having it. And you might find other ways than the ones I'm going to suggest to have this kind of experience. So I'll just offer a few prompts, actually. I think I'll do it in this order. So to begin, bring to mind someone that you care about. And then start to focus on the warm feelings you have for that being. Could be a pet, child, a friend, a group of people, partner. Feelings like compassion, kindness, friendliness, maybe love, support. And then start to really focus on the feeling of support, and you're kind of for them. Like you would want to help them, or you'd be on their side. You would speak up on their behalf. What's it feel like to be supportive? To be loyal? Okay. And then knowing what it feels like to be caring and supportive and loyal in a kind of a strong way. Imagine now that the person over there that you're supportive of and loyal to, including in a strong way, is you, has your face, has your name, is wearing your clothes, has your challenges. And you can imagine this person outside you. That works for some people. You might have it more of a sense inside you. What's it feel like to be supportive and caring and strong on your own behalf? Can you meditate on this experience? Instead of the sensations of breathing, can you meditate on feeling supportive and strong for yourself? And then to finish, if you like, you can then really bring it inside. You can say, okay, what does it feel like for me to be on my own side? How would you sit? What would your face look like? You might imagine that you're with others who are supportive. Let's start there. And you respect yourself. You're not putting yourself above others, but you're not below others. And then imagine how you might be with mild conflict, maybe with someone you live with. You just had a grounded, calm, dignified confidence in yourself and that you supported yourself. What would that feel like? And how would it go, maybe, in that relationship with someone at work or at home, if you had a settled, centered feeling of your own worth, that you matter, and you're going to stand up for yourself? Can you imagine how good that would feel in this relationship? To finish, can you let the sense of this really sink in and establish itself inside you? Kind of like letting it inhabit you. It's this way you want to be going forward. All right, that's the practice.
Thank you. So we're getting some different questions coming in here. We're going to start reading some off. I thought I'd start with a couple most related to self-care. I think, through the exercise that you just led, as well as your talk before that, you could sort of get a sense of this. But there's two questions here really relating to how to have self-care and self-compassion and sort of a sense of balancing that against others' needs. We have Lilia here asking how one can keep the balance of self-caring and be able to hold space and support for others' needs. There never seems to be any more time or energy for self. And we have Christine here, who's working with traumatized kids. It's great work, but how can she separate compassion and pity for someone and help herself with self-compassion to not burn out? We have a lot of teachers watching tonight from our recent Mindful Education Summit, so I have a feeling that this will be a relevant question to many people.
Yeah, well, my own background, I did my dissertation on 15-month-olds, and I have a background in developmental psychology, and I've worked in a lot of schools, and I think there's a special place in heaven for teachers. So, let's see, briefly, the first question partly has to do with your own values and your own circumstances. And sometimes we're in situations where we're just obligated. We got to do it, right? We have an aging parent, we have a child who's ill, we have 2 jobs we have to hold. We work 16 hours a day to feed our family. That's just the way it is. Then the question becomes, can you change those circumstances gradually over time to something that's more sustainable and fair and sane? And also during these tough periods, can you find those little cracks? When you wash your face, when you use the bathroom, when you eat a little food, when you take a breath, do you give yourself 1 breath a day where you totally relax and let go? Okay. How about 3 breaths a day? How about 10? right there, about a minute, 10 breaths, about. Can you give yourself that minute a day that's just for you, where you reset? And that minute can make all the difference in the world. 1 minute is infinitely larger than 0 minutes. That's mathematics for you, and it's true. So that would be the thing I would just say. And then beyond all that, I think that there are two things to pay attention to for the first question. I'm not sure they're relevant at all, but I want to name them because they're often generically useful. The first question is to ask yourself if you have internalized shoulds or rules that are not good for you today. And maybe you needed to do them then, but these days they're actually not true or fair or appropriate, or including a special version of this, that you think you should be heroic every day to ask for anything from anyone else, or that if you're not, getting a gold medal every day, you're not allowed to take anything for yourself, and people will leave you. And that's a should that's based on an assumption that's probably not true today. So that's worth asking. What are the internalized shoulds that are leading to this tilt or asymmetry of what you're pouring out versus what you're taking in? The other is to ask yourself, who benefits? It's a classic question in Latin, cui bene, who benefits? Or as they say in criminal investigations, follow the money. In other words, who's getting benefit from what could be frankly exploitive? What people in your family, what people at work, what larger social systems, maybe patriarchy in general, is getting payoffs through exploiting you. And some clear-eyed understanding of that is really useful. You may be unable to escape it short term. It might be dangerous to reveal to others that you recognize the unfairness and the exploitation of you and the hypocrisy and the double standards. You may not have the basis to be able to speak up, but as long as you know in your innermost temple what's really true, that can make all the difference in the world. Then the other question about compassion fatigue, caregiver burnout, how do we do that? Again, has to do somewhat with values and also short-term, long-term. Sometimes we just burn a lot of inner capital and we drain a lot of inner batteries because we've got to come through for this kid or this family or this situation tonight, this week, this semester. Sometimes we just do it. But long term, we ask ourselves, what's the proper balance? And there's good research that shows that people are able to sustain compassion and support for others, particularly when they have some kind of practice, like Kaylee's programs so skillfully offer, of mindfulness and self-awareness and body awareness and basic personal healthcare practices. Those enable us to keep pouring out and pouring out and pouring out year after year after year after year after year. That's very important to do. Another is the balance that in Buddhist psychology is talked about sometimes as compassion and equanimity. So we want to have a heart that can include the whole wide world and can see the being behind the eyes of the other person, even if they are your adversary, and can see the thou over there rather than treating others like it's, like things that are means to one's ends. On the one hand, while on the other hand, having the emotional balance, the steadiness, the stability of resilient well-being, not just neutral emotional balance, but that there's well-being inside you. That's true equanimity. Resilient well-being is true equanimity. Then you can, as different proverbs put it, walk evenly over uneven ground. Or I think it was a minister in Los Angeles, Marshall, last name will come to me, looking out at the world with quiet eyes. So the two go together, and having equanimity enables sustained compassion, and having compassion warms up equanimity that could otherwise be sort of too cool and too indifferent. So that's what I think about it. How do you grow those? And for someone probably like the questioner, they've got the compassion box ticked. They're open, they're receptive, their heart is huge. Great, already, thank you. And how can you maintain a kind of equanimity along the way, including through realizing that there are two truths. One truth is that we are all interdependent waves in a single ocean of reality, in a single world, and we are entwined. Our fates are entwined. We practice for the sake of others, and we bring others with us in our own practice as well. And their practice serves us, our practice serves them. That's one part of the truth. So a teacher and a child, myself and a client, we're interdependent on the one hand. The other truth is that we are completely differentiated, that the causes manifesting as this particular wave in the ocean are distinct from the wave right next to it. The causes, the effects, one might say the karmas within this life that are rippling through Kaylee are distinct, even though she and I are connected in a vast number of ways. And there's an equanimity that comes when we have this kind of recognition of the dependent arising, the ways in which what's happening in that child is due to so many causes that are independent of us. And there's a calm that comes in when we see that. It doesn't mean that it doesn't touch our heart, but we're somehow more able to bear that and to hang in there with it when we can see things in this larger picture, this larger perspective.
Thank you. We're getting definitely some more questions coming in, and I'd love to go over a couple more, but I see that we're getting pretty close to the end of the hour. And I did let folks know that we'd have a moment to hear about your Foundations of Wellbeing course. And I want to make sure to leave time for that because we're going to be making a special offer. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that, and then would you have time to answer some more questions after that?
I'm notorious. I could keep going and be fine, but for other people's sake, we better, wrap it up at some point. But I do want to say one last thing. Just a little neurological hack. It's great. When we bring our visual awareness really close to us, understandably, that tends to stir up the sense of self, and we tend to feel more vulnerable and potentially threatened, or like we're kind of almost invaded by what's in our face. On the other hand, when we extend the gaze out, or in our imagination, we get a sense of spacious awareness, with the sky of mind, it's sometimes called. Or we move our gaze out to the horizon, or we get a sense of the room as a whole, or we imagine the total life of this child, or this family, or this relationship, or the larger community, or the larger span of history. It's easy to get very caught up in politics these days. I certainly can. And to be able to locate that in an historical perspective that's thousands and thousands of years long, just in terms of recent history, recorded history, that wider perspective, sense of things as a whole, reduces feelings of threat, reduces anxiety and the sense of the self, the beleaguered self, me, myself, and I, and takes us more into a sense of perspective and calm, and taking things less personally. Just doing this little trick, and people can try it. It takes only seconds. You start looking out, or you get a sense of the whole, and instantly you start calming down and having more equanimity.
Okay, so I did want to take a moment to ask you about your Foundations of Wellbeing course. I'm excited because we've done this several times now, these calls together, and we always try and find some special way of offering this course to our community. It's something that we really believe in. It's an incredibly well prepared and offered program. Basically, it's guiding you through the 12 pillars that we've touched on tonight in a way where in as little as an hour a week, you can go through the whole set of them over a course of a year. And so I'd love to hear just from you a little bit more about this program, what's inspired you to create it, and then we'll follow up with some more questions after that.
Yeah. Most of us have had some kind of foundational instruction in basic skills of functioning in a modern society, like reading, writing, basic arithmetic, nothing fancy. We've had foundational training. Very few people have any kind of comprehensive, systematic foundational training in mental health or well-being or personal practice, both for functioning and happiness in general, and along the way, building up inner resources to deal with some of the bruises and shortfalls of a normal life. So that's what this Foundations of Wellbeing program is. It's really foundational. It brings to bear everything I know from clinical psychology, a tremendous amount of practical neuroscience, and it's informed all along the way with a very penetrating analysis of the mind, entirely secular, in the Buddhist psychological tradition. And so it's all kind of pulled together, infused with my goofball spirit. It's really practical. It's got to be fun or we're not going to keep doing it. It has to be relevant or we're not going to keep doing it. And it has to be soulful. It has to touch our heart. Otherwise, we're not going to keep engaging in it. So that's what the program is. And we bring in all these fantastic guest speakers. Tara Brock, Jack Cornfield, Barbara Fredrickson on positive emotions, Kristen Neff on self-compassion, all kinds of people as experts. I present a lot of material in it. We have a lot of bonuses of different kinds, self-assessments, we have community. There's so many bells and whistles in that program. Nobody complains that the Foundations of Wellbeing offering has too little in it. Nobody complains about that. And I want to stress the point, though, that on the scale of 10 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, people can lift their baseline sense of what it's like to be you over the course of the day and grow. The fundamental outcomes that we go after are a substantially increased, unconditional, internally based sense of peace, contentment, and love. That's the aim. Along the way, a lot of other skills for dealing with other people, applications to work, applications to children, applications to particular issues that people might have. It's not a therapy program, and it can be quite therapeutic, frankly. That's really great. But the ultimate fruit of practice is to expand out this unshakable core inside yourself that's in your innermost being that feels fundamentally peaceful, contented, loved, and loving, even when the world around you is challenging. And that's the promise of the program. We have a 30-day guarantee. I shouldn't say this, but I will. Anybody ever wants a refund, we so happily give it to them. Here, no worries. You know, we have continuing education credits in it for people who want to do this for therapy. I think it's the premier comprehensive foundational mental health and well-being and self-actualization program that's available online. And I think other people tend to see it that way too.
Thank you. Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's set up so that you can go through all 12 pillars over the course of a year in about an hour a week, but it's also flexible. So that's one of the great things about it.
Yeah, you can bounce around. If something's boring, keep going. No worries. Just keep on going. Look at something else or jump ahead, work your way back. You know, I've known people actually, they'll say, well, I'm going through it for my third time now, because it's about practice. You know, isn't it interesting, Kaylee, that people they'll work hard. They'll put real time into things that to them don't matter very much, but they have to, or they just feel obliged to, or they're habitual about it. They just do it. But how often do people put 10 minutes a day systematically into becoming stronger, wiser, happier, more loving, more peaceful, deepening sense of contentment in this life? Wow, 10 minutes a day really can make a big difference over time.
So as I mentioned earlier, we like on these calls to make a special offer to the community. This is whether you're watching live or the follow-up recording afterwards. And so I spoke with Rick's team before, and we're able to offer a coupon code to take $50 off the course. It's already quite reasonably priced for everything it offers, especially. So if you use the coupon code Awake50, you'll get an additional $50 off. So that's a total of $200 off the whole program when you pay in full. There's a link below this video that you can click on to see that coupon code that'll also bring you to the page where you could register. There's also scholarships available as well. I encourage you to check out if that's what you need. And in addition to that, the Awake Network also likes to offer a sort of bonus. So both the coupon code and the bonus that we're about to offer is available until this Saturday. So if you register by this Saturday, you can get the $50 off using that coupon code and one of two bonuses offered by the Awake Network. So the first bonus is the full Mindful Living Week resource package, which is one of our popular summits that has over 14 hours of video content and digital resources. Includes 25 dialogues, presentations, guided meditations from renowned psychologists, meditation teachers, and psychologists. And in this resource package, it's really a map for integrating mindfulness into each area of your life. And so that's one option, or you can choose to get free access to the Mindful Education Summit, which was just launched. Many of the people that are watching are going to be well familiar with, and similarly has, I think, over 16 hours of content, really looking at how to bring mindfulness into education and mindfulness to children and youth. So you can see more about both of those bonuses and the coupon code AWAKE50 by clicking the link below. If you're interested in the course, I highly recommend registering by Saturday so that you can take advantage of both of those. Yeah, we're going to take a couple more questions now, just brief ones, but anything else from you, Rick, before we move on?
No, it's great. Super, and I appreciate you, Kaylee, talking about this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for offering it. Okay, so let's see, it's 7:05 now. Rick, would another 10 minutes be okay, or is that too much? That's okay? Okay, so we're going to go to 7:15 Mountain Time, folks. Okay, so a question from Abu, sort of looking at the other side of self-care. He wants to know, or they want to know, when does self-care become narcissistic or egotistical?
Sure. Huge question. That's partly why I made that point earlier about how cultivation undoes craving, because I would say 80 to 90% of the people who present with pathological narcissism, they really are self-centered, arrogant. They have a hard time recognizing others as beings. They tend to exploit other people. Probably 80, 90% of the time, the origin of that is the insufficient internalization of healthy narcissistic supplies. They're called healthy social supplies of feeling seen, mirrored, cared about, prized, even cherished. So to deal with tendencies toward narcissism today, or vulnerabilities, so that a person feels wounded or hurt when they're devalued by others, or sensitive to criticism, or sensitive to feeling dismissed or unwanted by others, it's actually really, really helpful to deliberately look for authentic social supplies, and when they're available authentically, take them in and feel them sinking in. I have a lot of methods also in the Foundations program about using this material to heal old pain, or to fill up old deficits, old lacks, where you didn't get enough of the good stuff when you were younger inside yourself. So today, when you're having a chance to experience some of these healthy supplies, really, really take them in. So paradoxically, as you take them in increasingly, you tend to become less of a jerk, and you tend to become less self-centered, which is a way to address, the question that was raised, so that self-caring increasingly is not driven from some underlying sense of not feeling recognized and appreciated enough, but self-caring increasingly comes from just a normal kind of caring you bring to a friend who actually has your life, who has your feelings and your circumstances. That's part one. Part two is to ask yourself, as I alluded to there, the friend test. If my friend were burdened in these ways that I am, suffering in the ways that I am, with the mind that I have, what would a normal, natural, reasonably gracious and appropriate, humane response be to my friend? What would I wish another person would do for my friend? How would I want another person to treat my friend? Particularly another person who, let's say, cares about my friend. That sets a standard. That's the friend test. And if it would be appropriate to do it for a friend, or to think that somebody else should do it for your friend, then it's okay. Then it's appropriate to do it for you. On the other hand, if as soon as you ask yourself that question, you would start thinking immediately, my friend is pulling for a whole bunch of compliments. Hasn't she heard him already? Or, whoa, there feels something kind of manipulative about this. Or my friend is using her wounds, her reproaches, or his complaints, or, as a way to kind of create a demand upon others for supplies. Oh, well, if that's what you're doing, and it wouldn't be appropriate for your friend to do that, well, it's not appropriate for you as well. So I think those are really, really quite helpful. And then I just think the last is, I have a kind of saying these days, partly looking out at the world, it is astonishing. Actually, it shouldn't be astonishing. It is striking how irresponsible, unkind, casually dismissive many people can be. And in a word, how shitty many people can be. And one of the lessons for me actually is just from history. Think about the history. And you can obviously scale this up to our political level now. History tells us that people can be noble and people can be shitty. Choose noble. And to me, that's kind of why the foundation of all the spiritual traditions is virtue, morality, doing the right thing, especially when it's hard to do the right thing and things really count. Just show up. You don't need to be saintly. You don't need to be perfect. But on any given day, know that in your heart, there's a sincerity and a goodness and an effortfulness that's brought to bear, including through restraining yourself in various ways. And then, just know that. And then from time to time, if you get a little greedy for some of those narcissistic supplies, tell me more. Why'd you like my book? Can you give me a 10-star review? What? They only stop at 5? What? If you do that occasionally, it's more allowed. If in general, you're really standing in what could be called unilateral virtue.
All right, I think this might be our last one. And this is more of a general question off of the 2 pillars that we've been focusing on. How can you grow in confidence? Are there practices?
In confidence?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, confidence, by the way, as Kaylee knows, is one of the 12 strengths. It's one of the 12 pillars. And it's one that I relate to our needs for relationship. And in a lot of ways, confidence originates through the internalization of caring from others and valuing by others. And then as we move increasingly out of childhood into adulthood, we develop this kind of confidence increasingly in how we see ourselves. So I think that to just really bottom line it, first, in terms of taking in, look for opportunities. Ready? I've got a list. I've got a list for most things. 5 ways to feel cared about, starting with easy, then moving upward. If you have a chance to feel included, seen, appreciated, liked, or loved, slow down. Recognize those facts. Help yourself feel seen, feel liked, feel loved. And then when you're feeling it, slow it down for a breath or 2 or more to receive it into yourself, bit by bit by bit. That will tend to really grow feelings of being cared about, which are a very key aspect of confidence. Also, when you are expressing caring, when you are compassionate, when you're kind, when you're friendly, when you have a sense of your own good heart, your own warm-heartedness, your own virtue for other people, then 2, slow down. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself realize, I'm being a pretty good guy here, or I'm not being a jerk. It's pretty good, actually. Really, it's pretty good. I'm not being a jerk, even when they're being a jerk. So to have that kind of self-respect, to feel it in yourself, that'll increase confidence. Another thing about confidence is to have the idea that in this life, you get to play. It's okay. In other words, you don't need permission to sing. You don't need permission to dance. You don't need anyone's permission to write a book. You don't need anyone's permission to try something. And I think there's a kind of bone deep feeling. Many people walk around, I certainly have at earlier times in my life, way too constrained. Like we're living in a slot, as long as we go up and down the slot, we're okay. There won't be any kind of shaming attack. But actually a lot, go for it. Why not? I think people kind of feel like they need a guarantee of success before just going for it. And if you look at it that way, give yourself room to breathe, be large, and focus on intrinsic rewards, then you don't need so much assurance as an aspect of confidence that there will be a success. The journey itself seems worth taking, and you're giving yourself room to breathe without having to be successful at everything you do. I think we tend to be way too uptight, partly because we're comparing ourselves to others all day long. So that, and then last, realize that It's wonderful and horrible. No one's going to care in 100 years for most of us. Whether we have whether we have a huge success or a huge flop, it's kind of gone. And with that larger sense of perspective, then you can have more of a kind of relaxation about what the results are. And then what we can count on, though, is the sure knowledge of our own virtue every day. The sure knowledge in our bones of our sincerity, our effort, that we worked. We did the work. I have this dorky dadism, the dad saying, nothing digs ditches like shovelfuls of dirt. One shovelful at a time. If you know in your bones that you are digging that ditch, you are clocking the minutes in front of your computer screen, on the keyboard, or learning new things, or polishing your manuscript, or reaching out to other people, you're doing the work, then that will give you a lot of confidence from the inside out.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's always a pleasure having these calls with you. And thank you so much to everyone for joining and watching. Just as another reminder, if you're interested in learning more about the 12 pillars of well-being, check out the link below this video. You can see the Foundations of Wellbeing course. The coupon code AWAKE50 will give you $50 off if you use it by this Saturday, November 9th. And you can also check out the bonuses from the Awake Network that are being offered with that as well there. So again, thank you so much, Rick.
Oh, complete pleasure. And I really wish everybody well. And I want to leave you with the, two things that are really true. No one can defeat you inside the inner temple of your own being. And no one can practice for you there.
Thank you, Rick. See everyone later next time.